time to learn.
I'm going to give you a lesson in art.
Value Study Part 1, Shading Spheres. This lesson will help you practice using value to create forms when you're drawing. Just like I've been able to use value to shade this sphere to make it look three-dimensional. A value scale is a chart for organizing the range of dark to light in a work of art. Value scales show the range from the darkest dark to the medium values to the lightest light of values. A value shift is the change of value from dark to medium to light in a work of art. Shading, shifting values and shadows to make art look three-dimensional.
It's time to learn.
To begin today's lesson, practice creating a value scale of your own. Practice having a little rectangle that has a dark, medium, medium light, and light value on it. This will help you when we are shading spheres. Hopefully you are able to recognize that this sphere has value on it, from dark to medium, medium to light. When you put the dark furthest away from the light source on a drawing, it will look three-dimensional. It will have shading.
It's time to learn.
For today's practice lesson, you're going to need a pencil, an eraser, and a piece of paper. To set this picture up, we're going to make some folds to create the grounds. So begin by folding your paper in half. It's easiest to fold paper in half by lining up the corners before you make the fold, and then just press the paper down gently to make a nice even crease. For the middle and the background of this picture, we're going to go from the top half of your paper to the top of your picture for those two grounds. So we're actually going to take that top piece of the paper and fold it towards the halfway fold. So then the top half of the paper is folded in half again. This will give our paper 3 folds in it. I'm having you practice it this way to help you see and begin to understand how to use grounds when you draw. To make things look closer, you put them in the foreground. To make them look far away, put them in the background. Then we're going to draw a large circle with the bottom of the circle resting on the foreground. That's the lower half of the paper. And the top of the circle going over that middle fold to the middle ground. That'll give the illusion of overlapping, and it'll make the circle look bigger later on when we begin to add value. Before we start shading and adding value to this circle, we have to determine our light source. I'm going to put mine right here, and my advice is to put yours somewhere where mine is, kind of like in the same spot. This will make it easier for you to practice by looking at my example too, so then there's not a lot of guesswork involved. So here is my light source. Now you got to figure out how the light is going to be hitting your circle. Light usually travels in a straight line when it hits something, so the parts that are closest to the light source will be the lightest parts of your sphere. Now it's time to begin shading. The way I do this is I add my darkest shade first on the outside edge of my object. This is a circle with a curved edge, and so I'm going to follow that curved edge as I add the value across the object. When I go this way, when I make a curved line going across, it gives the illusion that this object is three-dimensional. It looks like it has a contour to it. While I'm shading, I'm remembering my value scale. I'm going to start with the darks and go from dark to medium, medium to light when I shade. I'm trying my best when adding value to my sphere to make the transitions between dark values to medium, medium to light as smooth as I can, avoiding any clear lines between the values on my form. Now that I've added value to my sphere, I'm going to make the shadow. I'm going to do this by just taking my finger and just carefully pulling some of that dark value away from the light source, using my finger to just blend it a little. Now once you've made your shadow, go back and redraw the dark values in around your sphere. That will also help add contrast and make your sphere look like it's popping out of your picture a little better. And you lost a little bit of your dark value when you used it to blend the shadows on your picture. I'm going to add my next sphere in the middle ground, and so I need to find where I folded my paper in half. On that little fold, then I'm going to draw a smaller circle. This time the bottom of it is below the middle ground line and the top of the sphere is above it. Now I'm going to practice adding value to my second sphere, this time figuring out where the furthest part away from the light source is, and I'm going to shade that part first and then kind of get gradually lighter as I get closer to the light source. So it goes dark to medium, medium to light. As I finish up my second sphere, I'm going to practice by creating and adding value to some more spheres around the light source, shading them away from the source of the light as I add value. It's easiest to go from dark to light because your pencil is a dark value. On the other side of my big sphere, I'm going to try overlapping and shading some spheres. This will give me a little bit of practice when dealing with how to shade something that's overlapping. You have to remember one thing. If the object that is closest to you is a little bit darker, and so anytime you see that and you want the closer thing, the bigger object, to look like it's popping out at you, you just make that value slightly darker than the one behind it. And to help myself understand how the light source would be hitting it with smaller spheres up in the background, I'm going to draw a couple of them on the top fold towards the background. So they'll be a little smaller and they'll look further away. And there you have it, some spheres shaded around a common light source. How about that? Now let's try an experiment with the different grounds. What I'm going to do is now it's time to try drawing lines over the folds in your paper, allowing the spheres to overlap them. I'm going to do the same thing on the upper fold. I'm going to draw a line there to make a separation between the middle ground and the background of my composition. Separating my grounds out with lines will help later when adding some contrast to my picture.
It's time to learn.
We're really going to create some space now by adding some contrast to our pictures. Contrast is placing a dark value next to a light value to create depth and space in your pictures. The way we're going to use that with these pictures is we're going to use those lines that we just drew dividing our grounds up, and we're going to use those lines to kind of sync our dark values right up next to it. And so there'll be a dark value next to a light value in our grounds. That'll create contrast and make the closer ground pop out. And so in this case, my background is going back because there's a dark value there. The middle ground is popping forward because there's a light value next to the dark value. That's what contrast can do. Adding contrast will make things look closer and some look further away. Contrast makes things pop out at you. It really helps when you're trying to make things look 3D, especially when you're adding like little bits of value here and there. Like I gave that sphere a little bit of a highlight to make it pop out from the background, which is dark. So putting a dark next to a light, that's contrast. One of them's going to pop out at you. Using the line I drew dividing the foreground and middle ground, I'm going to create more contrast by making the dark value above that line. So my middle ground gets the dark value, pushing it back. And then I'm going to do the same thing. As I go higher up from my middle ground, it's going to be dark to medium, medium to light. There'll be that value shift there. As I add contrast here, by putting a dark value behind the light values of my spheres, I'm pulling one towards us. The spheres will pop out. I'm using a couple of techniques here. The overlapping is one of them, and then the contrast is the other. When you do that, you're going to see an illusion of something coming closer and something moving further away. Now that we've practiced this basic technique, I will show you how to use it for other kinds of drawings.
Time it is. It's time to learn.
Part 2. Practice setting value to small drawings or doodles around a light source. Now instead of using basic shapes like spheres to add value for practice, I'm going to have you practice with some doodles or little drawings that you made up. But before we get drawing, let's review a little bit about value. A value scale is a chart for organizing the range of dark to light in a work of art. Value shift is the change of value from dark to medium to light in a work of art. We're going to use these value shifts from dark to light when adding shade or shading our drawings today. Shading is using value shifts and shadows to make art look three-dimensional.
What time it is? It's time to learn.
To set this picture up, we're going to make some folds to create the grounds. So begin by folding your paper in half. It's easiest to fold paper in half by lining up the corners before you make the fold, and then just press the paper down gently to make a nice even crease. For the middle and the background of this picture, we're going to go from the top half of your paper to the top of your picture for those two grounds. So we're actually going to take that top piece of the paper and fold it towards the halfway fold. So then the top half of the paper is folded in half again. This will give our paper 3 folds in it. I'm having you practice it this way to help you see and begin to understand how to use grounds when you draw. To make things look closer, you put them in the foreground. To make them look far away, put them in the background. Now that you've got your paper divided into foreground, middle ground, and background, go back in and add 3 large doodles in the foreground, 3 medium-sized doodles in the middle ground, and 3 smaller doodles in the background for our value practice. You're also going to need to add a light source. I put mine in the upper right-hand corner of my picture today. For this drawing, I'm just going to start with the doodle that is closest to my light source to begin, and that's this little bird here. Now, everywhere the wing is sticking up and everywhere on my doodle that is going to have a shadow, I'm going to make that the darkest value. Now, when you're dealing with doing something that isn't as cut and dry as a sphere, you're going to have to guess sometimes, and that's okay. You have to try to figure out in your imagination or in your mind's eye where the shadows are going to be falling on your doodles. Then once you've figured out where your shadows go, then you can add the medium and light values on them as well. When you're drawing something that has a lot of different reliefs or contours, things that stick out, things that go away, like the wing of a bird and the feathers on a bird and things, you're going to have to add little bits of value here and there, so when the person is looking at your picture, when the viewer is seeing it, they're able to kind of pick out some areas where the feathers will appear closer and further away, and parts of the actual picture that, like the wing is coming closer here, so I'm adding value to the head, it's going further away. I'm adding that space with value here. Hopefully you're starting to see that value is important, and when you start to understand that a dark value where your shadows go, medium as it goes across, and light where the light source is hitting your object, when you start adding that stuff in there, it'll make whatever you draw, even a doodle, look three-dimensional. It's a really fun thing to practice. And then when you're basically done, you can go back in there, figure out where the light is hitting this object in my little bird here, and then I'm going to add a little shadow, and I'm visualizing where the light would be being blocked by the bird. And so the light is on top of the bird here, and it would cast a shadow underneath it. Light sources and shadows are going to change every single drawing because they're going to be moving around the light source, and so they won't be the same. Now for the next few parts of this video, I'm going to go through and shade each and every one of my doodles. I'm going to just do the same thing I just did with my first bird here, which is find out where the light source is hitting each one of my objects or doodles, and I'm going to make that the light side, or the light value of it. I'm going to go across it and then add my shadows in. I start with my shadows because it's easier to use a dark value to make a shadow, and pencils are dark values. And so I'm going to start with my shadows, go across my drawing to make the medium values to the light values, that value shift again. Once I'm happy with how I've added my values to my doodles, I'm going to add the shadow and then just do some finishing touches on my shading and move on to my next doodle and just go down the line, picking out where the light is going to hit each one and then shading it in, adding my values from dark to medium, medium to light on every single one of my doodles. The fun part about adding value to things, especially with doodles, is each one of them is going to be entirely different, and you have to make a lot of artistic decisions when you do this. As an artist, you need to decide what you want to be closer, what you want to be further away in your picture. And when you add value, you have to know that contrast will help show that space, and also how you add the darks, mediums, and lights on there will determine how the viewer sees your artwork. And so this is just kind of a great practice. And since they're all so entirely different, you get to use your imagination and do a little guesswork too. In the end of it, you have to ask yourself, does my picture look right? If the answer is yes, then you're good to go. And if the answer is no, then you have to go back and ask yourself, what could I do to change my artwork or to change my picture to make it look right? And then you have to be resilient enough to go back and make those changes until you're satisfied with what you've made, until your artwork looks right. One thing to keep in mind when learning how to get good at drawing and learning how to add value and just in being an artist is you have to get good at just practicing and something called trial by error. Meaning if you don't really know how to do something, practice it, take a look at it. If it looks right, you did it right. If you have to make some changes, it's okay. It happens all the time. You just have to make sure that you're okay and you forgive yourself for having to make some changes on stuff, because that's just how we learn. And that's how you're going to get good at making art too, is if you just keep moving forward, ask yourself the question, does this look right? And if not, what do I need to change to make it look better? And then just go with it and keep developing and practicing, and eventually you're going to really like adding this value to stuff, because it really does help make your even doodles look like complete drawings. It also helps give you control over the space that you're using on a two-dimensional work of art. And there you have it. A nice little value practice using some doodles and a light source. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.
What's for lunch?